You are live.
I'm live. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm scared, Jacob. This is a topic that people find very triggering. It makes them very, very angry. I'm not sure why. It couldn't be guilt and shame, could it? So I just had a little look up online about what is considered promiscuous, and there isn't really a universally accepted level that's considered promiscuous. But some people are saying 10, like 10 sexual partners is the right amount for a person to have, and anything more than that is considered too much. By that measure, Jacob, are you promiscuous?
Oh,
You don't have to say. It's public.
no comment.
No comment from Jacob. By that level, I am 7 or 8 times the promiscuity level.
Little slag.
So no judgment from Richard on this one. If you are categorized as promiscuous, I certainly would be. We can get into whether I subjectively think that's a good thing or a bad thing later on, I suppose. But we should probably dive straight into the topic and the studies related to this. But I would just say that up front, like I would be classed as promiscuous, and I do have a terrible track record with relationships, but correlation is not necessarily causation. So we're looking at whether promiscuity has a negative impact on current relationships and on marriage in particular. So could you pull up, please, Jacob, the first study I sent to you? This is in the Athens Journal of Social Sciences. The relationship between sexual and emotional promiscuity and infidelity. This was done at the University of, I think it's called Minho in Portugal. And the lady involved is called Joana Arantes and Ricardo Pinto. And that's a funny name because Richard can be shortened to Rick or Dick in English. And Pinto is a Brazilian slang term for a very small penis. Sorry, I said that just as Jacob was sipping his tea. Sorry, mate. Penis. So the main aim of the present study is to relate for the first time the sexual and emotional sides of infidelity that is characterized by any form of close physical, thank you, I didn't bring my glasses, physical or emotional involvement with another person while in a committed relationship with promiscuity, which is typically defined by the search for the maximum sexual pleasure or how easily and often someone falls in love. So in this particular study, they were looking at both physical and emotional promiscuity. And they came up with some interesting results. If you could scroll down, please, Jacob, to where we start to see some of the definitions, that would be good. Actually, if you zoom out a little bit as well, that would be good for me. Oh, yeah, that's better. So for the introduction, actually, I'll just read this first paragraph because it is interesting. In a world where infidelity and promiscuity are increasingly experienced, few studies have focused on their emotional and sexual domains. The infidelity and the promiscuity can have an important impact on individuals and on intimate relationships. For example, the infidelity, this is written and then checked by people for whom English isn't their first language, is one of the most common reasons for divorce and couples therapy. In addition, promiscuity is known to have a negative effect on healthy living. And then it references different studies for this, which you can see on the screen here if you want to go and look them up yourself. The most accurate definition of infidelity may be the one that states infidelity is any form of involvement, romantic or sexual, short or long term, while the individual is in a committed romantic relationship with another person. It is known that for many people, infidelity only incorporates the involvement in unfaithful sexual behaviors. But in fact, it can also refer to emotional betrayal. Therefore, infidelity can be divided into two domains: sexual infidelity and emotional infidelity. Okay, so if you could scroll down to, it will be called the conclusion. This is a very lazy way. Actually, if you just stop on that page exactly there.
Yeah.
So could you switch the screen to my face for 1 second? Just because I haven't looked at it for a while and I'm I'm missing my narcissistic supply.
There you go.
Incredibly handsome. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So I've just pattern interrupted myself. What was I going to say to you? There is the correlation versus causation debate, of course. And when you're looking at studies like this, right off the bat, I'm not trying to discredit them, but these are typically done with self-reported questionnaires. This is a sociological paper, not a psychological paper. But I think the same gentle criticism that I'm about to level applies. It is very dangerous to consider all published research as hard scientific conclusion. It certainly isn't. Even in the hard sciences, that's not how science works. You've probably heard that before. In psychology, in particular, there is a replication crisis. That means that if I was to produce a paper saying all Scousers love, what do all Scousers love?
110s.
What's a 110?
It's a type of shoe.
Oh, it's a shoe. All Scousers love 110s. And I find conclusively that they do. And I go around and I ask a bunch of people from Liverpool, do you love 110s? And I find conclusively that yes, more than the median amount of Scousers, people from Liverpool love 110s. And that's a psychology study based on their subjective appreciation of the beauty of the 110. If Jacob goes out and tries to replicate my findings, he fails. Sometimes more than 50% of published peer-reviewed psychology research fails to replicate. So just bear that in mind. When we're filling out self-report questionnaires as human beings and then feeding that back to another human being, I struggle personally to call this science. It's certainly scientific and it's not useless data, but I would ask everybody just to stay calm with this stuff. So if I say, here's a piece of research that conclusively shows X, Y, or Z, take it within this context, take it with a pinch of salt. This is sociology, it's psychology, it's trying to be rational, it's trying to be scientific, but it's not the final word on anything at all. Thanks, Jacob. If you could bring up those 4 hypotheses onto the screen again. Hey, do you usually do such academic podcasts, Jacob?
Really?
Not typically.
No.
I'll tell you what, it's the future, mate.
It is.
So the hypotheses that they came up with, these Portuguese researchers came up with. So it says, our study aims to investigate the relationship between sexual and emotional promiscuity with sexual and emotional infidelity. In addition, we intend to analyze possible sex differences. Our hypotheses are emotional promiscuity is positively correlated with emotional infidelity. Sexual promiscuity is positively correlated with sexual infidelity. Sexual and emotional infidelity are positively correlated. Sexual and emotional sexual and emotional infidelity and promiscuity are positively correlated, both promiscuity and infidelity, and that men tend to be more sexually promiscuous and sexually unfaithful than women, and that women tend to be more emotionally promiscuous and emotionally unfaithful than men. So if you go back to me for a second, the lazy guide that I have for you when you're reviewing psychology papers, so somebody or any paper, somebody throws a paper your way, and I was talking to a doctor the other day who's a published researcher who has a genetic disorder named after her. She's a legitimate scientist. And I said, oh, I'm just doing psychology. This is how I blag reading psychology research and even other scientific papers. I often just read the abstract and then I read the conclusion. And she was like, that's what I do. We don't do it different in medicine. Like if you're trying to do a paper quickly and you need quick references, you read the abstract and the conclusion. I'm telling you this now so that in the internet space, when somebody makes a claim on a podcast or in an Instagram post or Facebook, you can go and look up that claim. Don't be intimidated. Find the paper, read the abstract and the introduction. Well, just read the abstract. You must read the abstract. Scan the introduction. It is supposed to be written in language that anyone can access. This is part of the peer-reviewed research process. if there are technical terms in there, they're supposed to explain to you what they are. If the paper is written in a way that's considered obfuscatory, which means they're covering the data behind highly technical language and jargon, it can get rejected for that. So it's supposed to be accessible. So don't be scared. Read the abstract, scan the introduction, read the conclusion, and you'll probably have a pretty good grasp of what the paper's about. That's the way it's supposed to work, by the way. If you want to cut a paper apart in psychology, I'll just tell you a little trick that I learned over the years. It's my own thing. You can always pull psychology research apart by saying, who was your participant group and what was the group size of your people who participated in the experiment? And it's a really lazy thing to do. It's a naughty thing to do. But this is the nature of psychology. It typically won't be large enough. And if it is large enough, it won't be diverse enough. So number one, look at the participation size in the research. And number two, when you're talking psychology, if you really want to pull a paper apart, then you're going to have to read like the research method a little bit. You're going to have to read their further suggestions, and you're going to have to get deeper into it. But you will find probably for most psychology papers, inside of about 20 minutes, if you're prepared to read beyond the abstract and the conclusion and actually go through what they've done, the methodology, you'll probably find that there's something they've missed. They haven't accounted for ethnicity or nationality or age or financial status or education level, or there'll be some extraneous factor, and these extraneous factors are infinite. They're as infinite as your imagination. That means that the research isn't conclusive. I'm just teaching you this as we go along. So the hypotheses are that emotional and sexual promiscuity will be positively correlated with actual infidelity. So what does that mean? It means that if a person is sexually promiscuous, they're forming a lot of sexual bonds before the relationship. They're more likely to be casual in forming new sexual bonds during the relationship. The other hypothesis is if somebody has formed a lot of emotional bonds before the relationship, they are emotionally promiscuous, that they're more likely to do it in the middle of a relationship. Could you pull the hypotheses up again, mate? Sorry. I remembered two of them. Emotional positivity, emotional promiscuity. Oh, that's right. So emotional promiscuity goes with emotional infidelity. Sexual promiscuity goes with sexual infidelity. We covered that. Sexual and emotional infidelity are positively correlated. Sexual and emotional promiscuity are positively correlated. And that, so if somebody is sexually promiscuous, they're going to be emotionally promiscuous. If they're going to be sexually unfaithful, they're going to be emotionally unfaithful. That's the hypothesis of the researchers, that men are more sexually promiscuous and sexually unfaithful, and that women are more emotionally promiscuous and emotionally unfaithful, which feeds into a pretty common cultural myth. So women are more likely to emotionally cheat, men are more likely to sexually cheat. And this is another way in which, if you want to critique psychology and psychological research, you can just you can say the presuppositions of the research are not bereft of cultural presuppositions. So personality disorders, which is what this channel normally talks about, if you wanted to critique it from that point of view, you'd say these are culture-bound disorders. This is a culture-bound diagnosis. Bereft of our cultural norms, this diagnosis makes no sense at all. And this is one of those things where I would say that's a cultural myth. Men are more sexually focused. They're more sexually promiscuous. They're more sexually predatory. Women, they're more emotional creatures. They're not as interested in sex, and they'll be emotionally promiscuous and emotionally unfaithful more than sexually unfaithful. And the research gives us some interesting results on those topics. So if you could scroll down to the results section, please. The methodology is a self-report questionnaire. That's not science. Sorry, psychologists. So this is where you have to study statistics, which hurts. But you can see, if you're prepared to just have a little look beyond the numbers and the symbols here in order to analyze the relation between promiscuity and infidelity. There was a certain type of correlation that was conducted. That's a certain statistical methodology. The results are shown in table 1, which is given within the rest of the paper. And age was significantly positively correlated with sexual promiscuity. So the older people were, the more sexually promiscuous they were. And with emotional promiscuity. So the older they were, the more emotionally promiscuous they were, showing that older participants tend to be more promiscuous than younger participants. Okay, if you're going to critique this, what would you say? You might say, or older participants who are filling out a self-report questionnaire are more truthful than younger participants, or they're not as full of shame, or they're not as full of guilt, or they're not as likely to give you data that is dodgy. I don't know. I'm just making suggestions as we go along. Additionally, age was significantly positively correlated with both sexual infidelity and emotional infidelity, indicating that older participants tend to be more unfaithful than younger participants. Relationship satisfaction was significantly negatively correlated with sexual promiscuity. This is a study that supports the notion that if a person has been very sexually promiscuous, they will be less satisfied in a committed relationship. And that emotional promiscuity, indicating that participants who perceive their relationship satisfaction as being lower, tend to be more promiscuous. Relationship satisfaction was also significantly negatively correlated with sexual and emotional infidelity. Obviously, people are less satisfied with the relationship. They're going to look to get their jollies emotionally and sexually elsewhere, indicating that participants who perceive their relationship satisfaction as being lower tend to be more unfaithful. Could you scroll down a little bit more, please? Thank you, Jacob. Okay. Additionally, sexual and emotional infidelity were also significantly positively correlated. That makes sense. If you're going to be sexually unfaithful, you're probably going to be emotionally unfaithful, and vice versa. So emotionally promiscuous participants tend to be emotionally unfaithful and sexually unfaithful. It's there in their research. Scroll down a little more, please. Okay, let's go down to the section called conclusions, please. Again, discussion. This is not gospel. This is an indication. So in the discussion, our main goal was to investigate the relationship between sexual, emotional infidelity and promiscuity. Regarding the emotional domain, results revealed that there is a positive correlation between emotional promiscuity and emotional infidelity. That makes sense. So if somebody forms a lot of emotional bonds with a lot of people, then during a relationship, they're likely to continue that pattern of behavior. These findings are consistent with our first hypothesis and show that individuals that tend to be more emotionally promiscuous tend to be more emotionally unfaithful. In terms of the sexual domain, which is the title of this podcast, results showed that there is also a positive correlation between sexual promiscuity and sexual infidelity. So this is a study, as I say, that shows it supports the idea that if a person has a higher body count, as the kids say today, body count used to mean murder when I was a kid.
Someone in the chat said, what's everyone's body count? I've lost count of how many people I've killed.
Right.
Less than 20.
It's body count. Like body count was a mafia thing or a serial killer thing. Documentaries when I was growing up. In terms of the sexual domain, yeah, we got that. Stating that individuals tend to be more sexually promiscuous, also tend to be more sexually unfaithful. These results support our second hypothesis. Scroll down a little bit more, please. Now we're into the cultural myths. The results of our study showed that sexual infidelity and emotional infidelity are positively correlated, of course. So somebody who's sexually or emotionally unfaithful, if they're sexually unfaithful, they're going to be emotionally unfaithful. If they're emotionally unfaithful, they will also be sexually unfaithful. Regarding promiscuity, our findings suggest that in the same line as infidelity, sexual and emotional promiscuity are also positively correlated, corroborating our fourth hypothesis. No research relating sexual and emotional promiscuity have been conducted. However, we can hypothesize frequent sexual intercourse raises the possibility of one falling in love with someone. Yeah, duh. Jones and Paulhus, 2012. The nature of a human being is such that if they have regular sexual contact with a person, it's highly likely that they're going to fall in love with them. Fewer research has pointed to sex differences between males and females regarding the frequency of unfaithful or promiscuous behaviors. In terms of infidelity, our results suggest that men are more likely to engage in sexual and emotional infidelity than do women, which is consistent with some findings in the literature, I should say. And it's also consistent with our cultural myths. If you scroll down a little bit more, moreover, studies also report that of the people who admitted to being unfaithful, women say they engage more in emotional infidelity than men, whereas men engage more in sexual infidelity than women. Possible explanation on sex differences related to infidelity are provided by evolutionary theories, not that the participants could be lying, because psychology and sociology are infinitely naive fields of study. They state that men have difficulty in the matter of forgiving sexual infidelity due to paternal certainty. Can you put the screen back on me, please, Jacob? Yep. So the research on this is consistent, and even the anecdotal evidence from couples counselors will back this up. If a woman cheats on a man, men seem generally to have a much, much harder time forgiving sexual infidelity. And the hypothesis that's been post hoc developed, that I think seems largely sensible to me, is kind of like an evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology hypothesis, is this is to do with parental certainty. So if a man loses his ability to know with certainty that offspring are his, then he loses his investment in the offspring and loses his investment in the relationship. A woman knows who she has been with. A man has to take it on trust. So forgiving sexual infidelity is actually biologically riskier in terms of the propagation of our DNA to a man than it is to a woman. So for that reason, it seems to be harder to forgive. But possibly for that reason, it seems to be harder to forgive. If we go back to the paper, please, Jacob. Whoa, infinitely me. Perfect. Regarding females, emotional infidelity is more harmful than sexual infidelity because when a male develops emotional involvement with another woman, the risk of losing the resources and long-term commitment increases, thus reducing the probability of bearing a child and disseminating her genes through generations. Wilson et al. 2011. If you go back to me, please, Jacob. So this is a given. You'll see this reported in other podcasts and other Instagram posts. Women have I find this a bit like of a tendency to create like false dichotomies. So men be like and women be like. So men have a harder time forgiving sexual infidelity. Women have a harder time forgiving emotional infidelity. Because as I just said, if a man gives his emotion to another woman, rather than just sex, if he's giving emotion to another woman, it indicates to the woman, because she also takes risk when she propagates her DNA with a man. The man doesn't know whether whether he's definitely the father. That's his risk. The woman doesn't know whether the man is going to continue to invest in her. So she doesn't know whether he's going to continue to invest resources into her and her offspring. The great risk for the woman is that she could have the man's babies and he disappears. That's generally considered the biological female nightmare. The biological male nightmare is that he's actually raising children who don't carry his DNA. So emotional cheating is much, much harder to forgive for women than it is for men. And sexual cheating is much harder for men to forgive than it is for women. Another point on this, it's a bit of a taboo subject, and it's another one of these things that gets people really, really het up and triggered and feeling judged and feeling, I don't know what they're feeling. They seem to go into emotional flashbacks, but then oftentimes that's what social media seems to be for. It is, generally speaking, harder for women to acquire love from men. And it is, generally speaking, harder for men to acquire sex from women. So that means that the higher value resource is the one that is in least supply. So what tends to happen, and this is not hard science, it's an observation we could take philosophically, anthropologically, sociologically, whatever, philosophically, is there is an imbalance in what men and women value in a relationship. men seem to value sex more highly than women do. Women absolutely value sex. Nobody's saying that they don't, but men seem to value it more highly. And women seem to value emotional attachment more than men do. Men absolutely value emotional attachment, but women seem to be more invested in it. And I think when you're talking about resources, what makes a resource high value is scarcity and replaceability. So if something is very scarce and hard to replace, it is higher value. So for a man, to acquire sex with an attractive partner is a pretty big deal. It's quite hard to do. And if he loses that sexual partner, he then has to do a lot of work. If we're talking evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology, burn a lot of calories, take a lot of risks to reacquire that precious resource. Talking about humans like resources, Jacob. I'll get in all sorts of trouble with me. For a woman, the precious resource that is scarce for her and hard to replace is love, is commitment. And if she loses that with a man, she's going to have to burn a lot of calories and do a lot of work to find it again. This is part of the cultural mythology. I think it generally seems to bear out. It generally seems to be true. We should get some members of the gay community to come in and see how they feel about it. I actually have had that conversation with a couple of lesbian friends of mine. Not to divert the topic too much, but there is findings that suggested that domestic violence was, if you compared heterosexual couples, gay men and lesbian women, domestic violence, some research indicated domestic violence was highest amongst lesbian women. And it's not like I have a ton of lesbian friends, but I know two couples who've been together for over 10 years. And when I asked both couples what they thought of that research, they gave me the same answer, which is once you've fallen in love and you found that committed relationship, it's hard to find it again. So there's a lot of mate guarding, which we typically associate in modern cultural mythology with something men do to women. Mate guarding, protect the mate, don't let anybody else get to her or take her away. Actually, lesbians, like the two couples that I spoke to, reported that was an awful lot of what the stress in their relationship would be around. Emotional cheating, talking to other women, the effort that was required to mate guard because of the scarcity of a good relationship. They would then have to go out, be single again, and go through this whole torturous process again, which they didn't want to do. But anyway, we should probably get some more people in to talk about that for themselves. Back to the research, please, Jacob. How did I dodge those laser beams? He's smiling because he knows I just did some acrobatics there. Yeah, I did some Aikido around that one. Nevertheless, there are some studies that did not find sex differences regarding infidelity. Feldman and Kaufman, 1999. In terms of promiscuity, there are only a few studies that focused on sex differences, showing that men are designed for short-term mating. You be careful, you research person. Who designed him? Whereas females for long-term mating. Oh, that's terrible. You can't say that. Jacob, well, listen, I didn't say this. This is what this research paper says. And I tell you who else said it. Buss and Schmidt and Kenrick et al. In an evolutionary perspective, males engage in more unrestricted behaviors due to offspring matters. This wasn't written by people who have English as a first language, trying to disseminate as much of their own genes to future generations, while females show more socio-sexual restricted behaviors because once a good mate is selected, the female will secure the mate, given the resources and healthy genes provided to offspring. And I wonder, I'm just casually wondering, if in same-sex female relationships amongst lesbians, if they're with a woman, if this is found to be a genuine biological pattern, whether you as an entity, as a woman, still mate guard as though your partner was male, who was like a male who could run off and try and disseminate his sperm everywhere. Again, I'd probably need to get some more people in to chat about that who are not middle-aged white men who are privately educated, like me. Our study, consistent with this literature, found that men tend to engage in more acts of sexual promiscuity than do women. Men are just shit, Jacob. Whereas no sex differences were found. Aha, here's a cultural myth that was killed. Whereas no sex differences were found regarding emotional promiscuity, suggesting that both men and women equally engage in emotionally promiscuous behaviors. Therefore, our sixth hypothesis was not confirmed. More specifically, men in our sample tended to be more sexually unfaithful and sexually promiscuous than women, but both men and women were equally likely to engage in emotionally promiscuous behaviors. Men did not come out looking good in this piece of research. We're going to go through another couple of pieces of research, but I just want to feed something back here at the 30-minute mark around sexual promiscuity and marriage. Because we're looking at research, and I want to give my personal opinions and take a couple of questions as well. So if you've got any questions regarding the research, specifically regarding the research I just mentioned, please post them. Jacob will pull them out, make them clear, have them end in a question mark, and we'll discuss them. Brief point though, I was thinking about this, and I wanted to say that marriage is arcane and old-fashioned. And I was like, Richard, you can't say marriage is arcane and old-fashioned because it'll offend people. So I found a nicer way of saying it, which is that marriage may possibly be considered to be a little bit out of step with modern culture. And as an individual cannot realistically expect to live their individual idealistic philosophy in a culture that doesn't support that individual idealistic philosophy, so can a couple not really live a joint reality comfortably, free from turbulence in a culture. And by culture, I mean all their family, all their friends, everyone they know, all the television they watch. Say if you believe in fidelity and you believe it's me and you, babe, we're going to be one unit forevermore. It's just us. But every single program you want to watch on TV is saying everybody is unfaithful. And it implies that you should pleasure yourself at every moment as much as you possibly can. And if you don't, you're a loser and you should experience FOMO and you should be worried about losing out. And there's more pleasure over there. There's more pleasure over there. All of your friends are kind of passively or actively encouraging you to cheat or telling stories of cheating that seem to be positive. Even your family doesn't support you being faithful. My point is, how are you going to do that? Marriage is out of step with culture. I'm not even going to get into whether I think marriage is a good or bad idea in this podcast. We can cover it in another podcast. What my point is, you can't have an institution that is completely out of step with the rest of the cultural coordinates in which that institution is being upheld and not expect there to be problems. Jacob, could you look up how many marriages end in divorce now? How many marriages end in divorce?
In the UK, or?
Yeah, we could do in the UK, yeah. So as of 2021, the average divorce rate in the UK is 42%. So nearly half. That is an unacceptably high number. So when people come to me and they say, why aren't you married? And I say, okay, so I've been a businessman since I was 23. This is a contract. This is a legally, financially binding contract that I sign that is valid until I die. And most of y'all who engage in this, sorry, not most of y'all, 42% of you who engage in this contract want to end it. And then I watch you going through 10 years of torture or 5 years of torture or whatever it is. Or if you've got kids, 25 years of torture.
It's an interesting comment.
What's that? That's first marriages. Second and third go up exponentially. Well, once a person has proven themselves to be weak-willed and a moral degenerate, Greg, obviously. Come on, divorcees. I'm not scared of you. I'll put my gum shield in now. We'll do it. All of you at the same time. Let's go, divorcees. I'm going to have you. Yeah, just because you made a promise before your friends and before God and you're an oath breaker, don't be ashamed, oath breaker. I can say that because I'm a coward. I never got married because I knew after. That's why I don't even get tattoos. I don't get, and people are like, oh, do you think is it because it's haram? And I'm like, no, I'd get bored of it. Get bored of everything. I've been bored of everything. Any other questions about the research we just pulled up? Not really.
many lots of statements as usual.
Many statements and not a few questions.
Nothing pertaining to the research.
Okay. The amount of divorce in the UK since lockdown is unreal, says Suzanne. I wonder what the statistics are on that, because people were forced into spending an awful lot of time together. And yes, there was a claim going around that this would spike the divorce rates. I don't know whether that actually happened or not. When I went to Romania last time, I got a little tour, and I was taught about the old way of doing Christianity in Romania and the old Eastern Orthodox practices in Romania. And it wasn't explained to me amazingly well, but there was something where in the Eastern Orthodox Church, if a married couple had a problem, they would be locked into a dark room together for days on end and made to feed each other until it was resolved. And it was reported to me that this was actually an amazingly successful way of resolving marriage issues. And I was like, that sounds like flipping nonsense to me. And I went, don't be like that. Imagine it was true. And I went, okay. And then we're in a little philosophical exercise. If it was true, why would it be true? Why would it be true? And I thought, well, if it was true, if you're in a low stimulus environment with another human being, your mind's going to go to strange places. It's probably going to become quite a psychedelic experience. And a lot of your ego defenses and shadow would eventually break down, because you're essentially, like, if you're literally feeding each other, like if part of it is you have to feed each other, you're going to start to regress to childhood, and you're going to see that other person as a parent, and you're going to see them bereft of their ego defenses. And I imagine it could potentially be an environment where an awful lot of forgiveness would be created for human frailty. See, forgiveness is an important thing, Jacob, even in marriage.
Got a question here. What is the level of consensus in the research in promiscuity affecting men and women in a negative way in long-term relationships? Says Busy Becoming Myself.
Do you understand what that question means?
Not really.
What is the level of consensus? You mean consensus, I thought, was group agreement. Right. Am I wrong on that one? Is that what consensus means?
That's what I thought.
What is the level of group agreement? Consensus?
It's a general agreement.
A general agreement. What is the level of agreement in the research in promiscuity affecting men and women in a negative way? Oh, I see. He's asking, is there general agreement amongst academics? I don't know enough. This isn't my area of expertise. I know there is disagreement. I know there is definitely disagreement in sociology, anthropology, and psychology about this. That there's a tendency to report that promiscuity is going to have a negative impact on long-term relationships generally, but then there's research that indicates it's pH neutral. And if you asked me, I would suggest there's probably other factors that are going to be far more important than promiscuity in affecting the success of a long-term relationship. Well, I just mentioned one of them: forgiveness, empathy, boundaries, communication, truth-telling. If you are an emotionally immature, selfish, spoiled brat consumer, that's probably not going to go very well for either of you. If you are emotionally mature, have taken your psychedelics like you should have done, like a good person for the good of the people around you, so you're less of an asshole. These would be more of an indicator to me. I was going to leave this to the end, but I'll say it now. I personally like this live podcast is off the back of a Sam Vaknin Instagram post. So Sam Vaknin has an Instagram, and he posted, and it was from a girl who does a podcast, an American girl in the UK called Just Pearly Things. We've discussed it before, Jacob. It's a good podcast format. And she was talking about this thing of saying, like, if she said specifically women, if women are more promiscuous, they're less likely to be happy in long-term relationships. And the women in the comments underneath this, like the most upset women, not all the women, the people who got most upset were women. And I was like, why is everybody getting so upset about this? And I think they're not upset with the first level thing of what is being said. I think there's an upset with the implication, which is that, like, we're trying to create a sort of a handmaid's, like, this kind of a narrative is there to create a handmaid's tale world or Hitler's world, Hitler advocated that women should be engaged in the 3 Ks, Kirche, Küche, Kinder, which was church, kitchen, and children, which if that's what you read into it, I would find that abhorrent as well. I don't want people to be told how to live. I don't think we should have top-down authoritarians saying this is what you should do. I don't think anybody's government belongs in anybody's bedroom unless you are doing something immoral or illegal. It's nobody's business. So you should live however you want to live, in my opinion. But I think the implication that is drawn from conversations like this is women shouldn't be promiscuous because they'll have bad relationships, but it's okay for men to do it. And it's like this weird sort of unbalanced thing where we have a huge double standard. But at the end of the day, ladies and gents, as far as sex differences go, we already live with massive double standards in our culture. So yeah, the allegation that women are less capable of dealing with promiscuity and that it indicates mental health issues, I've heard time again. I've not seen strong research backing it up, though. I even looked at research before we came. Oh, actually, I think this is the second link. Could you pull up the second link, Jacob? Mm-hmm. I hope this is the right one. I wanted to look at research that, there it is. Yeah. The relationship between multiple sex partners, anxiety, depression, and substance dependence. So this is only one piece of research, okay? And so take it for what it is. But in this piece of research, there was no relationship found between being sexually promiscuous and anxiety or depression. Could you just flick back to me for a second? So the myth is, or I mean, it might not be a myth, it might be real, I don't know. This piece of research goes against it. The idea is, first myth, women who are sexually promiscuous are mad. And something about being sexually promiscuous affects them in a way different to men, because really women are biologically designed to only pair bond with one male. And if they pair bond with multiple males, their capacity to pair bond wears out. And that's what Just Pearly Things was saying in her piece. And I don't know that there's any hard scientific data to back that up. It's an interesting idea that you have like one cup or glass of pair bonding, and you can either give it all your pair bonding to one person, or if you give it to 40, by the time you get to number 41 and you're trying to get married, there's only a tiny droplet left of pair bonding. I would be surprised if that were true. And I tell you why I'd be surprised if that were true is because it's going to sound a little sexist. So generally speaking, I think human beings' superpower is plasticity and flexibility. We are very, very adaptable. We don't have big claws. We don't have scary teeth. Our bite is not strong. And yet we're at the top of the food chain. And apart from raw intelligence, we have adaptability. In a relationship context, my opinion, this is the sexist bit, my opinion, women are even more flexible than men are. They're even more plastic than men are. So it seems like a strange evolutionary adaptation to have the ability only to pair bond with 1, 2, or 3 men in your entire life. And when you go over that limit, you start to run out of pair bonding juice or pair bonding ability. That would seem to me to be a negative adaptation. That's a maladaptation, not a positive adaptation. So that's why I would question that. Again, it's psychology. And sometimes people find what they're looking for. It's just bad research. It's just bad science. I would be surprised if that were true. However, I also have seen anecdotally the correlation between people who are mentally unstable and high levels of promiscuity, not just in women though, in men. So anecdotally, I would say, look at me, for example. As I said in the beginning of the episode, I would be considered highly promiscuous. I'm also I've been throughout my whole life pretty mentally unstable, and I seem to be largely incapable of stable long-term intimate relationships. But that fallacy is called cum hoc ergo propter hoc in Latin, which means with this, therefore because of this, or correlation is not causation, is the way it's said. So what should we deduce from that? People who are more emotionally labile, who have weaker ego boundaries, who are more narcissistic, more codependent, have a tendency to fuse and merge with others. Well, you would have to look and say, are the people you're looking at, do they have a greater propensity to adapt a bunch of coping mechanisms? And then what does that sound like? CPTSD and borderline personality disorder. It is known, Khaleesi, you're going to drink more, you're going to take more drugs, you're going to probably overly attach to sex, but not just with partners, also with yourself and pornography. Basically, anything that brings you pleasure and takes you out of this reality, you're going to do more of. But that's not about the sex. That's about emotional dysregulation, not knowing who you really are, and basically suffering. You're in a constant state of somatic dukkha, to use the Sanskrit. You're suffering all the time, and you're trying to escape. So I don't have any conclusions on that one, but this piece of research that we've pulled up certainly indicates that the idea that people who are more emotionally promiscuous or more mentally unstable and experience more anxiety and depression is a myth. It's not true. However, there was something that they did find that was a little bit worrying. If you could pull that research up again. If you see any good questions, mate, just feel.
There was one here.
Go on, go ahead.
Do you think the negative effects seen from sexual promiscuity in the literature is a result of cultural conditioning or genetic factors?
Well, so based on what I just said, that's a good question, Sarah. Leave that question up, please, Jacob, because I'll look at it a few times. So the very notion that there are negative effects resulting from sexual promiscuity, I would say, has to be challenged. Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? I would even go so far as to say, yes, it's likely. So, but it's not just, in my experience, it's not just women, it's men. So if I was to say, obviously in Liverpool, here in Liverpool, where we are now, in my 20s, I used to work nightclub security. So there was high levels of promiscuity going on all around me. And in my life, I know 4 men who are handsome men who would be considered like, I don't know, Lotharios or lady killers or whatever. Really good with women, very successful, quote unquote, with women. All very, very mentally unstable. And as they aged, they all got worse and their marriages fell apart. And they are, having to look after children that they can't get full access to. And their life is full of drama and chaos and police. And they make weird attention-grabbing social media posts. What does this mean? Well, it's anecdotal. Maybe this is only something that affects men in the northwest of England. I don't know, but I doubt it. I think, and when we're using this word promiscuous to a highly religious person, and more than 5 partners could be promiscuous. I don't know how many women the guys I'm talking about have been with, but it will be in the hundreds. So maybe we need other terms. Maybe we need to say like promiscuous or hyper promiscuous, or we have to give it a number or a level or something, where if you are a hypersexual, addicted, promiscuous person, then that's an indication of other problems. By the way, in the cases of all 4 men, being very attractive and being very good with women was intrinsic to their self-image. So back to you, Sarah. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced that there are negative effects from sexual promiscuity. And this is me. So you'll hear me say things sometimes. You'll be like, oh, Richard's gone conservative. He's a right-winger now. He uses right-wing talking points. And because I believe in order, because I believe in sovereignty, because I believe in agency and strength. And I'm, generally speaking, anti-authoritarian, which is now considered a right-wing talking point. God knows how that happened. You'll see that. And I own it. I don't deny it at all. But then there's this more of a psychedelic hippie side of me that would vibe with more of a Terence McKenna style worldview. And I'd say, how did we evolve? Well, as Terence McKenna suggested, we don't know, but it's highly likely that when children were produced, it wasn't one man, one woman. They were produced in orgies, and the child wasn't Mr. and Mrs. Jones's child, that's their property. There is their teepee. You can see them over there. There is their cow. It's probably the children just belonged to the tribe. This is another idea that gets people really, really worked up. But that was probably the overwhelming majority of our time on the planet, which means that's what evolution takes time. Well, it doesn't take time. Evolution takes, how would you say that? Episodes. It's episodic, and episodes take time. So time is incidental. For evolution to evolve, it needs replication. We have to go again. We have to go again. We have to go again and again and again and again and again for very high numbers of things, of animals, of people before you can start to evolve. So where we've had the highest numbers of people and what we're most evolved for is probably not monogamy. It probably isn't monogamy. Children were probably produced. This is the Terence McKenna's idea. Well, he, of course, brought in psychedelics to it. He was like, well, we would have been high on mushrooms and we would have done a ceremony. But the status anxiety and the paternal anxiety is probably post-agricultural revolution. So when you live longer and you stay still and you have neighbors who can view you and you have status in a community with a God who views you and judges you, that's when things change. But we've only been living like that maximum 10,000 years. 10,000 years isn't even a blink of an eye. It's the signal, the nerve signal going to your eyelid to begin the blink of an eye. It's nothing. There's no evolution that can occur amongst humans in 10,000 years. It's an impossibility. So for the overwhelming majority of time before that, we probably just lived in small moving tribes of 50 to 150 or 50 to 100 people. And, that would have been, by modern standards, highly promiscuous because it would be, I'm going to be graphic, Jacob. You're a young man and I don't want to warp your mind.
I'm ready.
Okay. It would have been at any one time, most likely, and there are other reasons that indicate this that we can get into on another podcast if we want to have a sensible conversation about sexuality. It would have been multiple men with one woman at a time when she was most fertile. That's probably what sexual conduct looked like for most of human history. Not one man, one woman quietly having sex in the missionary position under a cross.
That's a gangbang.
Can they hear you? They can. Jacob said it. He's a disgusting Gen Zer, but essentially, yes. That's probably what most of human evolution looked like. And the worry about who your kids are. Oh, you're laughing at your own joke? He's having a laugh at his own joke. I said gangbang on a sensible podcast. No, it was never a sensible podcast because I was yes, Jacob, gangbangs. You've completely thrown me now.
Sorry.
There probably wasn't the worry. We probably just went, oh, they're just whose children are these? They're our children. And maybe that was a more sensible way to live, and I think we should bring it back. Join my gangbang cult. Sorry, Sarah. Do you think the negative effects from sexual promiscuity in literature is a result of cultural conditioning or genetic factors? So I've just answered that along genetic lines, which is, I doubt it's genetic. I really or I need an education. I need somebody like a geneticist, or who would do this, like a professor of evolutionary biology would sit me down and say, here you go, Richard, you actually haven't considered this. And I'll go, oh, wow, I'm a dummy. Sorry. Yeah, you're right. As far as I can see from where I'm sat right now, there would be no genetic reason for this. It's absolutely cultural conditioning, but don't make the mistake, Sarah, or anyone, of thinking, oh, here's genetics, here's culture, and that's just culture. Don't worry, that's just culture. Well, because hang on, wait a minute. Our culture is informed by our genetics, and our culture determines survivability. So our genetics have to adapt to culture. So cultural conditioning is very, very powerful, and there's no reason to assume it's not it's not as significant as a genetic propensity, because as I said, we're infinitely flexible. Just because you have a genetic propensity towards doing something doesn't mean you'll only be happy doing that. So I do not construct like a philosophy that says, because there's a philosophy that's rooted in good biology. Patrice O'Neill used to espouse it. Because men and women are different in sizes as mammals, that means we are genetically predisposed to having multiple partners. Therefore, we should have multiple partners. So in mammals, if there is a big mass weight difference, which amongst most mammals there is, between the male and the female, then there will be, what is it called? Is that called polyamory, where you have multiple in science?
I think so, yeah.
The polyamorous. They won't be monogamous. They won't stick with one partner for life. Typically, they will have multiple partners. And so there is a significant mass difference and weight difference between men and women. We are mammals. It's also to do with the gap between your anus and your genitals as well. And the bigger that gap is, then the more promiscuous as an animal you're genetically predisposed to being. That's fine. But that doesn't mean that we will be necessarily miserable trying to be monogamous. I mean, we can override our genetic propensity. Was there any other good questions? Thank you, Sarah. Was there any other good questions there, Jacob?
What about women who are in straight relationships prior to children and then have relationships with other women after having children? Is there any data on that?
I don't know. It's not my field of expertise. I mean, none of this is my field of expertise. I'm just looking at the research data that I've pulled up here. I'm not aware of any data on that. But there could be some research. What would the research be looking for? Are you trying to figure out in your own life if your girlfriend is likely to be faithful to you? You're going to have to get on Google Scholar like the rest of us, mate, and have a look. I can't help you with that, but that's an interesting question. Thank you, Leah.
Someone says, what demographic did the research cover?
The Portuguese research. Could you pull the Portuguese research up again? No, the Pinto PDF. Yeah. Let's go back to the top, please.
Search demographic.
Yeah. So yeah, search demographic. You can, yeah. I'm pretty sure they do say no. I thought it said somewhere. This is The Relationship Between Sexual and Emotional Promiscuity and Infidelity by Ricardo Pinto and Joana Arantes. So if you go and look that up, you can check it out. The university is in Portugal, so they might have been talking to, Portuguese people who are in the main Catholic, in the main still fairly concerned with each other's business, as they are in Spain. So you could get in quite a bit of trouble if you were found to be unfaithful within a marriage. So yeah, that's absolutely, when I was saying before, oh, hi, Solmaz. When I was saying before, if you want to critique psychology research, this is a question to ask. Which demographic did the research cover? Shouldn't they have taken on a broader demographic to get better results?
One here. What about men who have concubines or multiple wives?
Legends. Top cheese.
Top cheese.
That's fine. But if a woman did that, disgusting.
Haram.
Haram. It is haram.
Do you think these women are more likely to be impacted by emotional fidelity? Personally, I would feel betrayed.
Yeah. I don't know. I've wondered that. Like, what would it be like to be wife number 3? Do you think these women are more likely to be impacted by emotional infidelity? I don't know. I don't really know. This is where plasticity comes in. Like, how adaptable do you need to be to even just live with that? And I've met women who are happy with this, by the way. I've lived alongside Chinese people who, even to this day, people think it's over. China doesn't do that anymore. But there are people who are still living as though you could do that. And I've met a wife number 2 and I've met a wife number 3. I don't know whether it's legally binding, but that's how they live. And they say they're happy. And they say they don't have a problem with their husband having sex with his wives, with the other wives. But if he went outside of that, then they'd be upset. And I'm like, I don't know how. I don't see, personally as an outsider, I don't see the difference between that. And yeah, I could see emotional infidelity being a problem as well. Yeah, for sure.
That's all.
Sound. So if we go to the, I'll just quickly cover this. The second link I gave you that's up there now, the relationship between. Sorry, it's the one to the left. They're both called the relationship between. Sorry, mate. Go to the one called the relationship between, which they're all called. I only looked at research called the relationship between. So if you go down to the conclusion for this one, because I'm a little bit aware of time and I don't want to do people's heads in. In conclusion, this study examined whether multiple sex partnerships can lead to later mental health problems and found no association with anxiety and depression, but a strong association with substance dependence across 3 age periods. So this one covers the demographic issue in its own way. It looks at people at different ages. I think it was 21, 26, and 32, something like that. It highlights the possibility that interpersonal anxiety stemming from multiple, possibly failed sexual partnerships may lead to substance abuse problems, especially for women. Let me say that again. This is only the opinion of these researchers. It highlights the possibility that interpersonal anxiety stemming from multiple, possibly failed sexual partnerships may lead to substance abuse problems, especially for women. Changes in contemporary society are demonstrated in the current sexual mores and alcohol consumption norms. Our findings showed that there are serious health concerns regarding multiple short-term sexual partnerships. Thank you. Further research is required to examine these relationships in other cultures and to elucidate, I like a good word, the mechanisms involved. So this one busts the myth that the promiscuity is always associated with mental health issues. As I said before, anecdotally, the people I know who are hyper promiscuous were to varying degrees. One of them was fairly stable, but the other 3 are not. But when we're saying promiscuous, we need to have a better definition with more nuance of what that term means. So these were guys who were with women, like hundreds of women, and all cheated. They all cheated, whether they're married, not married, they all cheated. And that was a big part of their identity. What this study found is that there was a positive correlation between substance abuse and promiscuity, particularly with women. So they found that if a woman self-reported that she was higher than normal sexual promiscuity, then the likelihood that she would have a dependence on alcohol or an overuse or a misuse of alcohol went up by a significant amount. They hypothesize, as you just read with me in the conclusion there, that this could be around anxiety, around their ability to form successful sexual and romantic relationships. They might feel quite anxious about their ability to do it, and the anxiety about the ability to do that is then moderated by alcohol. It's not a subject for today. I don't want to get into it today, but I do think there is a sex difference between the way alcohol is consumed between men and women and the impacts it can have. If people are interested in that, we could cover that another day. And there is another subject, which is alcohol and promiscuity, because the most promiscuous women that I've known, I would say I've known 6 highly promiscuous women. Only one of the 6 that I'm talking like upwards of 40, probably upwards of 50 partners. Only one of them did that sober, and she was very, very stable. She was very, very stable, but she had a really strong sense of self, and she had like a peculiar but particular philosophy of life, and she seemed to be okay with it. The other 5 didn't. They said they were okay with their promiscuity to me. I didn't feel in my conversations from them that they felt confident, that truly confident they were okay with it. So there was there was an overcompensatory defiance when we discussed their promiscuity. Like, not that it's nobody's business, or it's fine when a man does it, but it's a problem when a woman does it. And it's like, well, why, if you're cool with it, why justify it? Like, when I say I'm promiscuous, I have been promiscuous, I don't give disclaimers or get defensive about it. I'm like, I've been very promiscuous. It probably isn't a great thing for my mental health, and it doesn't reflect good mental health. And it's probably has had a negative impact on my ability to have intimate relationships. I'm not defensive, defiant, aggressive, or compensatory about it. It is what it is. All of those 5 women did what they did inside of a cultural milieu that involved a lot of alcohol. And for 2 of them, it also involved a lot of drugs. And so we all know about the disinhibitory qualities of alcohol and the disinhibitory qualities of drugs. And I think we probably have to have a conversation about what it is that creates an environment where people feel they can do things that they wouldn't normally do, and why wouldn't they normally do them? And where does the guilt and shame come from? Like, why would you need to be drunk and high on drugs to do a thing that you claim when you're sober you feel is a completely morally valid thing to do? Can you believe that something is a morally valid thing to do, but feel the weight of cultural conditioning and cultural pressure so much that it creates a cognitive dissonance that becomes stressful and painful, which it clearly does for many women. It clearly is painful for many women to try to live this way in defiance of perhaps current cultural conditioning, or it might be childhood conditioning. So they're living on 2 ideological levels at the same time. One says, I'm a free woman, I'm liberated, I have every right to do this. If a man can do this and it's good, then if a woman does it, it's good. But at another ideological level, there's another voice, another internal voice, another interject that says, when girls do this, it is bad. Only bad girls do this kind of behavior. And that creates cognitive dissonance, which is experienced as like a somatic stress. So they don't feel good. So they'll get, in my experience, angry, super angry, irritated, not super angry. They become irritable and defiant and combative about it. I don't, Jacob, because I don't mind what people do. It's their body, not mine. Any questions on that before we move on to the next piece of research? Please feel free to give us one. I drink this vodka. Oh.
If you see anything, feel free to put, lots of statements.
But 50 partners, says Nicole Lagrange. Lol, that's nowhere near triple figures. Right. I said at least 50. Some of them were into triple figures. Kent Madsen says, does it even matter? Isn't it the person's own responsibility? Well, the subject matter today is relationships. So no man or woman is an island. If you get into a relationship, it's an interesting topic for conversation. Is like, does your partner even have the right to know how many people you've been with, what your body count is, how many people you've killed when you were in the mafia? Does your partner even have the right to know how many people you've had sex with? Is it relevant to them? Do they have a right to that information? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I've been in relationships where we never had that conversation, and it was never a topic of conversation. It was never a topic of discussion. It didn't impact the course of the relationship. The tendency I found in the last 3 relationships that I've had, so post 2016, is it's become an issue. And I think people want to talk about it more. Or maybe it's a generational thing. Like some generations want to talk about it. As a Gen Xer, we just like a don't ask, don't tell policy. Like what, I don't really know what good that information is going to do me anyway. But then maybe with generations, as they become more used to being putting things that are private into a public space and becoming more performative and doing things more for reaction, maybe they're more entrained to reveal this information. Is it the person's own responsibility? It's a bit of a cop out. Like, I think you do have a right to know who you're with, and if there is something in their background that indicates some sort of lack of moral boundaries or emotional dysregulation, yes, I think you have the right to know. So I think a girl who's shaping up to become a long-term partner of mine, she has the right to know about my mental health issues. She has the right to know if I've been in trouble with the law or if I've been an addict at some point. I absolutely feel like she has the right to know. I wouldn't want 5 years to go by and then it comes up and I never told her, because that lack of disclosure seems a little dishonest to me. These are things that can impact the flow of a long-term relationship. But it's a good question, Kent. Thank you for asking it. Reg says, do you think promiscuity is a symptom of other underlying issues, a symptom of a coping mechanism? It could be, but it might not always be. I think for some people, it's one of many things that they do. They drink too much. They get into fights with people, either physical or psychological. They gamble. They're shopping addicts. They're into all kinds of things. And promiscuity is one of about 9 different self-destructive coping mechanisms that they have. So yeah, it can be. It might also be an indication of something else. And I think we should keep an open mind. I think we should all not be too quick to conclude and be like, oh, well, the research says this, or my mum thinks this, so I'm going to go, or my favorite talking head on YouTube thinks this, so I'm just going to go along with that. That doesn't make sense to me to do that. Should we go to the next piece of research? Okay, the study that is frequently cited comes from these people from, now, what is this called? It's the Institute of, could you go to the About page? Sorry. Because it's the Institute for Family Studies, the IFS. There we go. So this is a place that really wants to promote marriage and really wants to promote strong marriages, kind of from a political and economic point of view. And it's frequently cited, but we need to understand our sources. So it would be unlikely for the IFS to produce research and to publicize research that said promiscuity leads to amazingly good marriages. Could you just flip the screen to me for a second? I nearly said this before and then I got sidetracked. If marriage is a somewhat arcane institution and our culture doesn't match it, then I don't see much hope for the future of marriage. Perhaps if we want to engage in marriage, we should be living in the way that most people who have engaged in marriage lived. So if they were a virgin, if most people were a virgin before they got married throughout human history, and that's how marriage worked, that's what we should do. If most people had a maximum of 1 sexual partner in their lifetime and then got married, that's what we should do. I don't think we get to have our cake and eat it too. I don't believe in that. I think that's a nonsense. It's a nonsensical idea that you can live an ultra-consumerist, ultra-consumer capitalist lifestyle, pleasure yourself as much as you like let's say from 18 to 30, rack up multiple sexual partners, and then at age 30 go, right, I'm now ready to pretend that I'm a little princess and that I'm a little prince and I want to get married in a white dress and live that fantasy and have somebody be completely loyal to me and serve me for the rest of my days. That doesn't seem like a reasonable proposition to me. And by the way, if you think marriage doesn't include service, loyalty, and sacrifice, you need to review those marriage vows. That is absolutely what marriage involves. Now, if somebody had saved themselves their whole lives just for you, that service, that sacrifice, that loyalty would be well merited, whether it's a man or a woman, or whether you're straight or gay. if that person has been given the best of themselves away cheaply to strangers for years, I don't know whether the service and the sacrifice and the loyalty is merited. And I include myself in this analysis. I'm not a hypocrite. Why should a girl offer the best of herself to me, especially if she's younger than me? Like, she's never been with that many people. She's been with, say, like 2 people, and then I'm gonna swoop her off her feet and marry her. Why should she do that when I've been living my life up until the age of 44 and racked up? I genuinely don't even know. Like, you could put a gun to my head and I can't recall, because I was living like a lunatic for years and drinking and taking drugs. And I genuinely do not know what the numbers are, but I know that they're high. Why should she do that? Is that fair? Is that a reasonable proposition? I put it to you that it's not. That's not a fair and reasonable proposition. And we've got to be more realistic about things. You know, this isn't Game of Thrones. Well, even in Game of Thrones, they're all shagging each other as well. Dirty little sluts. What was I saying? Oh yeah, if you go back to the research, please. Could you switch my mic off for a second? Mm-hmm. I'm just going to blow my nose. All right, let's go. We're back. Stop saying silly things now. Okay, so infinite regress. So what they found, shockingly, the Institute of Family Values, or whatever it's called, was that it is a negative correlation between marital stability and premarital sex. So let's get into this. Okay, it says American sexual behavior is much different than it used to be. Today, most Americans think premarital sex is okay and will have 3 or more. Jacob, what disgusting, decadent perverts is America? 3 or more? You've been with 4 people, you Jezebel. Jezebel, out of my sight. What, if anything, does premarital sex have to do with marital stability? Well, you won't know how crap your partner is in bed if you've only ever been with them. That's the best you've ever had. You've nothing to compare it to. They suck, or they don't. And you think they're great. So that's the advantage. That's what we should be going for. This research brief shows that the relationship between divorce and the number of sexual partners women have prior to marriage is complex. I explore this relationship using data from the 3 most recent waves of the National Survey of Family Growth, NSFG, collected in 2002, 2006, and 2011. For women, what have they done, those women? Marrying since the start of the new millennium, women with 10 or more partners, Jezebels, were the most likely to divorce. But this only, they can't even uphold their wedding vows, Jacob. Jezebels. Haram. But this has only became true in recent years. Women with 3 to 9 partners, semi-Jezebels, were less likely to divorce than women with 2 partners, and women with 0 partners. Bonus. Were the least likely to divorce. I want to get with a woman, Jacob, who won't even, could you put the camera back on me? Let me make this statement. I want to get with a woman who won't even have sex with me. Right? I want purity. I want chastity. Waiting means waiting. Right? So if your virginity has value, you keep it. Even from me. Even from me, you keep it. Jezebel. 0 to 1. I want my wife to have had 0 sexual partners. And when you come and see us in 10 years, you'll be like, are you happy? So look at her. Look at the happiness radiating from that unfucked woman. She's never been touched below the waist. And that's how it should stay. Disgusting. You perverts. Okay, let's go back to this. Completely reasonable piece of research. Women with 0 to 1 partners were the least likely to divorce. Good. Earlier research found that having multiple sex partners prior to marriage could lead to less happy marriages. It's drifting off on the right there. Could you scroll out a bit for me? assume. There we go. Less likely to happy marriages and often increase the odds of divorce. But sexual attitudes and behaviors continue to change in America. And some of the strongest predictors of divorce in years gone by no longer matter as much as they once did. In my 2005 book, Understanding the Divorce Cycle, I showed that the transmission of divorce between generations became weaker as divorce grew more common. Could the same thing have happened with sexual behavior? Somewhat surprisingly, the answer appears to be no. Even more noteworthy has been the decline in the proportion of women who get married having had only one sex partner, in most cases their future husbands. 43% of women had just one premarital sex partner in the 1970s. 43% of women had just one premarital sex partner in the 1970s. Or they were lying. You're saying at post-1960s sexual revolution America, 43% of women had just one premarital sex partner. I think they might have been lying to you, mate. I don't believe that. By the aughts, this was down to 21%. Neither of these two trends changed much after the first decade of the 21st century. Following in the wake of the sexual revolution, the 1970s have been characterized as a decade of carnal exploration, sin, and decadence. But this doesn't seem to have been the case for the vast majority of women who ultimately tied the knot in that decade. Almost 2/3 of them had at most one sex partner prior to getting married. Even in the 1980s. Do they believe these women? There's no fucking way. Yeah, one. Do you mean, does one mean the same thing in your state as it means in mine? Do you mean the number one? Like you've only had sex one way with 10 different fellas. Things looked very different at the start of the new millennium. So here's the distribution of women's premarital sex partners by marriage cohort. Or it could be the distribution of women being honest. You know, there's seriously, there's much more pressure the further back you go in time for women to lie. Probably, given that there's more social pressure, then they would have had fewer sexual partners. That's not an indication of whether they wanted fewer sexual partners. It's what they could get away with. But I think it's woefully naive to assume that the majority of your participants in a study like this are telling you the truth. I just seriously doubt they're telling the truth. If you could scroll down for me, please, Jacob. I'm going a bit Scouse. Let me pull it back to a more neutral state of accent. By the 2010s, only 5% of new brides were virgins. Okay. Unfortunately, the NSFG doesn't have full data on men's premarital sexual behavior. And in any event, they recall their own marital histories less reliably than women do. Men are terrible, aren't they? Hey, as premarital sex became more acceptable, it's reasonable to anticipate that its negative effects on marital stability waned. In general, so he's saying it's a cultural thing. It's reasonable to anticipate that its negative effects on marital stability waned because premarital sex became more acceptable. Well, what he's indicating there is when it had a negative effect on marital stability, it's because of the cultural conditioning that indicated that it was that conditioned us to think that it was a bad thing to do. In general, Americans became more accepting of non-marital sex. Certainly, fewer men entered marriage with the expectation of a virgin bride. All of the fanfare associated with hooking up is evidence that some young people have become comfortable with the idea of sex outside of serious relationships. If you could scroll down to the bottom, please. Oh, sorry, mate. Go to that first table. I'm so sorry. Yeah. The chances of divorce after 5 years of marriage by marriage cohort and number of premarital sexual partners. Okay, so that is a positive correlation based on his research. When you start, well, it goes up at 2 and then drops at 3 and then drops at 4. Well, that would indicate it's better if she has more. Don't have 2. So if your bird says I've had 2 partners, you'd be like, you need another 2 before I marry you. I want you at 4 or 5, my love. Come on. Let's get that swingers bar. It goes down after 2. So she's really likely to divorce you if she's had 2 partners. She's a bit more chill if it's 3, a bit more if it's 4 or 5.
I mean, it's a 5% difference, not really much.
Not much. No, you're right. And then 10 plus partners These Jezebels, they go wild with the divorce, and they're at the peak that they could possibly be. Okay, that's interesting. Scroll to the next table, please. Figure 2, the percentage of women who attend. Oh, this is what I want to know, Jacob. Are they in church? The percentage of women who attend church weekly. How many women, Jacob, do you know who attend church weekly?
None.
None. Then that's what they should all be. Yep. Nuns. I know 0 human females who attend church weekly. Not a one. So if they've had 2 partners, this is I see. 3 partners. Oh, their church attendance. I tell you what, Jacob, their church attendance, these Jezebels, their flesh is bubbling in the eyes of the Lord. They see that cross, they hear the hymns, and they think, I've got to get out of here because of all the willies I've had up me. 10 plus partners, they are not attending church weekly. They're going bi-monthly. Twice a month. That's not good enough. God knows. Why did you make the baby Jesus cry, you Jezebels?
In the 80s, the church attendance went up at 6 to 9 partners.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So you need 6 to 9. Tell you what, you've got to get them. You want them in church. The pastors should do their job and be like, my child, you must acquire another 5 willies up you. Otherwise, we won't see you here weekly. I'm not sure that I'd be quoting this much. It seems a bit, I don't know. It's not very urbane, this stuff. It's not particularly realistic. I mean, how anybody thinks it's relevant to analyze based on how many women attend church weekly, just is a bit, I don't know.
So someone asked what population this study's looking at, which might be helpful. Like, is it America? Is it global?
It's America.
Is it? Oh,
go on, ask the next question. Get me in trouble. Yeah. Which ethnic group was it? Which state were they in? How educated were they? And how much money do they have? Yeah, I wouldn't take this particularly seriously. So if you could scroll down a little bit more, let's hear what this chappie has to say. Generally speaking, women who have multiple sex partners are less likely to be regular churchgoers. Well, if you will marry a whore, then does your wife go to church weekly? She does not, slut. Since women with many partners don't consistently have high divorce rates, there is little reason to suspect that religion is an important explanation for the relationship between sex partners and divorce outside of women who marry having had one or no partners. What does that sentence mean? Since women with many partners don't consistently have high divorce rates. What? Since women with many partners don't consistently have high divorce rates. He just gave us a table in which they did. There is little reason to suspect that religion is an important explanation for the relationship between sex partners and divorce. I think that sentence needs a review, or I need more caffeine. Does it make sense to you?
Not really.
I mean, he's just going against what he's just said there. There is little reason, because women with many partners don't have consistently high divorce rates, refutation of what you just said. There's little reason to suspect that religion is an important explanation for the relationship between sex partners and divorce.
Go back to the thing is
that. Okay, but there's that. Yeah, I'm not massively impressed with this. I have to be honest with you. It's not blowing me away. Women who marry having had just one sex partner are unlikely to have had children with another man. Getting married with a child already in tow, judgmental language, has a profound negative effect on marital happiness. You've got a child in tow there. What are you dragging that child around for? We'll call the police. Has a profound negative effect on marital happiness. Oh, way. Come on, mate. And marriages preceded by non-marital fertility have disproportionately high divorce rates. Marriages preceded by non-marital? Does he mean infidelity instead of fertility? How do I know what a fertility is? What's Jacob, turn this off. What is non-marital fertility? And how would that be? Your fertility is not affected by whether you're married or not. Listen, Institute of Family Studies, thank you for your input. I don't know what you're on about. Did I give you a fourth link, or was that the one?
No. Oh no, yeah, that was it.
Okay. I will now take questions on any and all subjects. If if you could keep it relevant to what we've just been talking about. I wasn't very impressed by that. If any of you understood what those sentences meant and want to explain them to me, feel free. I don't know about non-marital fertility. What the bloody hell's that?
Other people were saying it doesn't make sense either.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I thought I was going mad. Gaslighting me now. Yeah, if anybody's got any questions, if you make one sentence long and end in a question mark, that would be helpful. And then I'm going to go to some other questions on some other topics. Yeah. What would the outline of the study be you would want to see on the topic? Well, I mean, there's an awful lot to unpack here. So I wouldn't even write a study outline. I want to know what promiscuous is. Like, what are we calling promiscuity? What does that word mean that we're bandying about? Can you prove to me that when we say, like, for men, it's more than 10, for women, it's more than 10? Can you prove to me that the levels are the same? If they're not the same, how are we going to regulate them for the study? If we've got a different judge of promiscuity for men than we do for women, is it a problem, or do we just ride roughshod over it? When it comes to marriage and relationships, I don't even know what people want. I mean, marriage, you'd have to convince me that marriage even has a place in modern culture. I'm not married because I think it's arcane, and I'm not a medieval knight with land, so I don't see the point. I really, really don't see the point in it. Even relationships, sorry, but I'm very unclear about what most people want in relationships. I can't even get a proper definition when I'm discussing it with the few terrible attempts I've made at relationships. And we'll end up having arguments, we'll end up having problems. I'll be like, well, what do you consider cheating? I think it was Sam Vaknin I first heard say this. Like, in modern relationships, we're in such a mess now. I don't know if he was quoting somebody else or if it's his own quote. I think it's his own quote. We have to constantly reconfigure the boundaries and the rules of what relationships are. And I'm sure people who've been in relationships recently will back me up on this. You have to have arguments about what cheating is. You never used to. Like 20, 25 years ago, it was just a universal given what was cheating and what isn't. And nowadays, it isn't. You have to. So, I don't know. What would I want to see as a study? I think probably from my point of view, as far as CPTSD is my main area of interest, it would be promiscuity and CPTSD. That would give useful data. I'm responding to a very emotional reaction to an Instagram post that Sam Vaknin put up. So that's why I'm doing this live, so I could look at the research and talk about this. I think this is one of those topics where everybody comes to the table with a prefabricated argument and a prefabricated point of view. So it's very difficult to sort of have like an honest, open discussion about it, free from an agenda. And you'll see people bringing their left-wing politics to it, or their boring right-wing politics to it, and their dumb agendas to it. And it's like, okay, let's step back for a second. What do we even mean by promiscuity? And is this are we in the realm of social constructs here? And as I said earlier, as far as evolution goes, if you look at what the human animal is, biologically, it's highly likely that promiscuity is merely a social construct. That doesn't mean it's irrelevant, and it doesn't mean it's wrong or inaccurate or anything like that. We may very well be able to, like, those of us here now, there's 490 people watching. If we were put to the task for 3 months as a group mind activity, put forward the case that it is better for modern culture for people to be less promiscuous, or basically put forward the case that for modern culture to function for the betterment of everyone involved inside of a society, fewer sexual partners is desirable. And that was our agendered outcome. I'm sure we could write something pretty convincing. That doesn't necessarily make it so. I'm not saying it is or it isn't. My internal intuitive suspicion because of my own subjective experience, I've seen a correlation between high levels of promiscuity and emotional dysregulation in my own life. I don't think it's great. I think it's probably better if we lived in a culture where people were encouraged to be people rather than things and consumers, and could find love, genuine intimacy with a partner, or there was so many decent people who you could be in a relationship with that if the relationship with one good partner just ended, you would end up with another partner or another two partners during an 85-year lifespan, but not 70 or 80 or 90 or 100 or 200 sexual partners. Like that seems a pretty strong argument. Like, it's probably better. It probably is. And your subjective experience, I'm sure, would be better. It is emotionally dysregulating to jump in and out of bed with strangers, to do intimate acts with your body. Like, if you think in our normal cultural conditioning, if I walked up to you at the bus stop and I did this down your face and stroked your face, you would probably be upset and or freaked out. And well, you should be. So in our culture, you may not touch people without their permission. You can't run your hands down somebody's face. It's too intimate. However, that same bus stop has a bar behind it. 6 hours later, it's 11 o'clock at night. You and I are 5 shandies down, and I start chatting to you and doing a dance up to you. How could you resist? Look at that. Look at the moves on that. And I'm coming up to you, and then we decide that we like each other. We're then touching each other's bodies. You still don't know me. You've only known me for like 5 hours more, and we're both drunk. And then you put your tongue in my mouth, and I put my tongue in your mouth. And then we go back to my house and do unspeakable things that would get me banned from YouTube if I mentioned them with our bodies. You know, it's a bit weird that. I mean, that alone is going to create stress and cognitive dissonance. That's a weird thing to do, I think. I think that's, I wouldn't say traumatic, but emotionally dysregulating. And it's a weird double standard to have. Don't touch anyone. Don't talk to strangers. But if you've had a drink and you're in a bar, it's normal to go back to their house and put parts of your body inside of their body and vice versa. I'm like, that's a bit odd. It says on my planet, that's not how we do things. It's a bit strange, that. Question. I like questions that begin with question. Mm-hmm. Fancy forest person. Question. Do you think mindless consumerism and mindless sexual selection is linked? Yeah, I do. I think that we've got more of a tendency. Somebody said this to me on an Instagram live, and I warned them I'd never credit them, and I can't remember the name anyway. We used to love people and use things, and now we love things and use people. And that's consumer capitalism. So yes, mindless sexual selection absolutely is consumer capitalism, because we're a product. That's why I don't like dating apps, because it's humiliating. I'm forcing myself to be reduced to a swipeable, not even a product. I'm the label on a product. That's all you see. You see like a few pictures of me, some stupid description of me. And then you go, yeah, I'd fuck him. I wouldn't fuck him. Yeah. Whilst you sat there picking your nose in your underpants, and you've gone through another 200 people doing that. It's like, really? Does that honor me as a spiritual entity, finding my expression amongst the stars on this planet? Not really. Not really. That's kind of like using me like toilet paper, and I'm not very keen on that. So yeah, I do think mindless consumer capitalism and unconscious sexual selection, we absolutely are using each other like products. People talk about each other like products. They review amongst their friends sexual experiences. Like, this is what this girl was like. What did she do? She did this. She did that. She did that. What was that guy like? How tall was he? What was he like in bed? How big were his toes? Etc. Fisk Black. Shouldn't women and men have different qualifiers, since there's different consequences for either sex? What's a qualifier, Fisk Black? What do you consider to be a qualifier? And what are the different consequences? I know where you're trying to go. I know where you're trying to go with it. And I'm not saying men and women are the same and men and women want the same thing. They're not the same and they don't want the same thing. And yes, there are different consequences to engaging in penetrative sex that ends in pregnancy. There's not different consequences to oral sex. There's not different consequences. Sorry, like can't have a conversation like this without being slightly crude. But you go to somebody's house and you make them come without having penetrative sex, which presumably most of the adults here are skillful enough to do. Jacob, you are, I'm sure. He's a rock climber. He has wonderful dexterous fingers. And so, I mean, so for me, like the whole sexual thing, I would just say, so before we get to where you're at, Fisk, is I do have an opinion on sexual promiscuity that runs like this. I think it is completely insane for strangers to get together and have penetrative sex. Completely insane. Like if you have one night stands, you're a lunatic. If you have unprotected penetrative sex with somebody you just met in a club, by my coordinates, you're a lunatic. And if I was your friend, I would slap you around the back of the head. And I've slapped friends of mine around the back of the head, male and female. You should not do that. You shouldn't in my humble opinion, you really shouldn't be having penetrative sex with somebody that you've not had non-penetrative sex with 3 or 4 times. I don't do it. I don't do it. I think in my whole life of all the people I've ever been with, it's happened once or twice because it's dangerous. And that was protected, by the way. If you do it unprotected, you are just playing Russian roulette. So there is that boundary. The way that you're going is kind of like the red pill thing where there should be different standards for men and women. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be. Maybe there should be, but present the argument, present the case in an intelligent and skillful way and offer me data that backs it up. Don't just tell me, well, women can get pregnant, therefore it should be different for them. Well, if in my country and in America, if I make a woman pregnant, legally, I'm bound to that child. So the idea that there's this vast difference in consequences is nonsensical. There isn't a vast difference. There's a difference, but it's not vast. There are still consequences. And I don't see any evidence for the idea frequently touted in the red pill world that women are more emotionally dysregulated by promiscuity than men are. I see just as much emotional dysregulation in men as I see in women. It's not really, again, like I generally speaking don't have strong opinions on this, but as I've stated several times, I don't think anybody should be engaging in tons and tons of promiscuous sex. Like, why? What for? Like, what are you doing? And by the way, let's be philosophical, rational, and Socratic here. How is no one getting hurt if you do that? By the way, that's totally acceptable. It's if I this year said I had sex with 20 women, it was fully consensual and everybody was happy. Do you know what the chance is that nobody got hurt by that? Zero. There's zero chance that nobody got hurt by that. Either I will have wanted to have had more than just casual sex with one of those 20 women, or one of those 20 women will have wanted to have more than casual sex with me. It's just statistics and human nature. But we talk about it like it's consequence free. I have an opinion on that. That's foolish. That's really, really childish. That is creating a scenario of winners and losers. Somebody is going to get hurt like that. The idea that we can all just do whatever the hell we want and there's no consequences is nonsensical. The idea that we can all do whatever the hell we want for 10, 15 years and then show up age 30 and go, right, I'm a princess. I'm a prince now. Give me my wedding cake is just fucking dumb. Like, I didn't do that because it's not. I didn't live like that. I don't think it's right. Next question, please. Vital Elements, a long-time follower. Do you think marital satisfaction is more about maturity and mindset or actually relative to exposure to broader experience? I don't know what, like, marital means marriage. I would not personally be satisfied with what I see as being an arcane and fundamentally unfair lifelong contract. It wouldn't do it for me. If I put myself in the minds of people who I'd have to put myself into somebody else's mind. Who wants that? Maybe people who are very insecure. They're very insecure about acquiring financial resources. I'm not insecure about acquiring financial resources. Maybe they're insecure about acquiring sexual resources. I'm not insecure about that. Maybe they're insecure about feeling lonely. I'm not insecure about that. Maybe they're insecure about, I don't know, like, why do you need this? Why do you need to bind another human being to you for life? It's bloody barbaric. But let's assume you do. What would lead to being satisfied in a situation where you've bound another human being to you legally for life? Would it be about maturity and mindset, or relative to exposure to broader experience? It's going to be more about having the same expectations. You need to have the same expectations as your partner. You need to have very, very similar values. And you need, I would think, this is the old Oprah Winfrey advice, you would probably both need to consider this. Jordan Peterson advice as well. Jordan Peterson gives great advice on long-term relationships, I think, because he's been in one since he was a kid. Like, I'm sure he was 18 or something when he met his wife. It's an ongoing project that must be worked on by both people. You must both work on it. It doesn't just spontaneously happen. And as he said multiple times, it is work. And I believe him. I believe him. So marital satisfaction would be relative to expectation, values, and the amount of work and sacrifice that's being put into it. And whether you can clean your damn room, bucko. You're married now. You make a goddamn sacrifice. Adam Spencer, what are your thoughts? That the idea that romantic love is not healthy, achievable, sustainable. Well, we know it isn't. Like, specifically, if you're talking roman, like, that means romance. That's the same root of the French word for novel, which is roman. It's fiction. It's absolutely fiction. That is what romantic love is. It's fictional. It's hyperbolic. It's from a certain period in literary history. It was to be consumed as entertainment. It was a highly caricatured view of knights and nobility and grand gestures. So absolutely, it's not achievable. It's like saying, is the Avengers movie achievable, or is Spider-Man achievable? No, it's a fiction. It was always to be enjoyed as fiction, and only in the last 30 years, it's 40 years or 50 years, I would say, has our culture got confused between a sort of an semi-ironic, entertaining view of love and actual love. So as the church and family went down in significance and entertainment went up in significance, we seem to get confused between entertainment and instruction. The Avengers movies are not instruction for how to live your life. And if you tried to consume them like that, you would have a weird experience. I mean, imagine if, like, there was a nuclear war tomorrow, and then we woke up the next day and the only guidance we had was, like, Thor, the movie Thor. And we literally took him as God. And we tried to live with, like, a half comedic, entertaining version of a Norse god and tried to make a religion out of that. It would be a bloody mess. And this is a bloody mess. It's a bloody mess. This is one place that I will say therapy and psychology really comes into its own. It really comes into its own. If two people want to live in the same house together for decades without wanting to kill themselves or each other, go to therapy. Speak to psychologists. That's the domain of psychology. That's the domain of therapy. And I say that only half jokingly, because wanting to kill yourself or wanting to kill the other person, what could be more triggering, more provocative, or more challenging than living with somebody for such a long time that all of your ego defenses disappear, all of your intimacy issues are triggered, and you're basically merging and fusing together your unconscious and the darkest parts of you and all of the shadow activation that goes with that. So yeah, it's unachievable. Romantic love is unachievable. Non-romantic love is bloody dangerous. So if you say, oh, romantic love is achievable, and even a mature version of love, like pair bonding or a partnership, is bloody dangerous. And you refuse both those ideas. You're like, no, romantic love is achievable, and a mature version of love is too boring. I don't want it, but if I accept it, I'm going to act like it's the safest thing. No, 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 no. This is incredibly hard. This is incredibly hard work. Incredibly hard work. Everybody here knows that. It ages you. It tires you. It challenges you. It's bloody awful. You're thinking of Alain de Botton talk on romanticism and love. I don't think I watched that all the way through, but I have seen it. I think it was an animated thing, and it was good. And I think I watched half of it and then got distracted, idiocy. But it was very, very good. Do you feel we are set up for failure approaching love in a romantic way? 100%. You won't achieve that. You won't ever know love as it was portrayed in a Jennifer Aniston movie in 2006. The romantic comedies of that period. Nobody lives that. Nobody lives that. It's not. See, the implicit narrative of that kind of reality tunnel is you find the right person, everything clicks, and there's just no more effort. Good luck with that nonsense. You're not that great. Your partner's not that great. You're human beings. You're full of light and you're full of darkness. And bonding together for long periods of time is going to be hard. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying do it. It's great when it works. It's fantastic, but it's really tough. Thank you, Adam. We're getting close to the end, aren't we?
I think we are, yeah.
What time are we on now?
7 minutes to 7.
7 to 7, lad. I tell you what, Jacob, we've covered a lot of ground here today. Should we do a couple more questions and then bounce?
I haven't really seen many more, really.
So no questions, no?
There was one here that I thought.
Are you aware? Twinkle tits. Why? Are you aware of any studies that look at promiscuity in relation to amount of time spent on social media, internet usage? Google Scholar would be your friend on that one, but no, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'd have a look at that. I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised if there was, but it could be a good suggestion for some young psychology students to have a little look at that. Question, please speak about your business course, what to expect, how it be delivered, what is the cost? Thank you. I don't have one yet, so I don't know. I'll discuss it with Jacob afterwards. I might just do a lot of content for free, and then I don't know whether there'll be a course. I don't know how to monetize it. Maybe I would just have people pay me to consult, or maybe we'll do a course. I really don't know. You're gonna have to wait and see with that one.
Rule number 1 of business: give shit away for free.
Yeah. Give all your best ideas away for free. Rule number 1. Was there anything else? There's not really many questions, are there?
I'm struggling. I'm looking through for question marks.
Like question marks? No.
Yeah, I've done a good old scroll as you were answering that. But
yeah, you're scrolling hard.
I think we've satisfied the audience here today.
Yeah. They're overwhelmed with the sheer weight of data that's been placed upon them. Tomek asks, narcissism and promiscuity. That would be one that Sam Vaknin has covered. So if you put in Vaknin, narcissism, promiscuity, he covers sexuality at regular intervals, especially as it pertains to narcissism. And he goes very in depth into the research and will give you a much more nuanced answer than I could. Okay. Well, that looks like it's it, doesn't it? Oh, do you think communication and relationship skills should be taught in school? Probably. I mean, there's a lot that I think that should be taught in school. But yes, I think avoiding what you've suggested, communication and relationship skills, plus avoiding abuse would be well worth doing.
Now all the questions are coming in.
Oh, it's because you said, as soon as Jacob said there's no questions, everybody's like panicking, going, ask a fucking question, otherwise they're going to go.
Oh, we're out of time.
Yeah, we have to go in 4 minutes anyway, folks. Do you see any amazing one? Are you proposing some kind of cultural practice? Yes, when I am the dictator of the United Kingdom, I'll be proposing many cultural practices. A lot of meditation and letting go of form and ego. And then from that place, attaching with love for another human being, without grasping, without dukkha, without upadana. Did you enjoy my Buddhist talk the other day, Jacob?
I did.
We'll be releasing that next week. I thought I talked for 15 minutes. I talked for 52.
Something like that.
I went off into my little Buddhist trance. We had a great chat about love and attachment, desire, the world of form, and the world of the spiritual. That'll be out next week. That'll be a good one.
And we're back again with the stream next week, aren't we? Same time.
Same time, same place, 5 until 7 UK times. We'll be doing the stream. We've got 4 every Friday this month, isn't it?
Yeah.
Every Friday in November, we'll be doing the stream, folks. Okay. So, ladies and gents, we're going to sign off now. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. If you want to leave a comment or a question, please feel free to do so. I'll get around to answering them tomorrow morning. And we look forward to speaking to you again soon. So cheers from me and Jacob at Liverpool Podcast Studios.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.